La diffusion vient de démarrer. Tous les participants sont en mode écoute seul.
Good afternoon, Europe and Africa. Good evening, Asia and Southern Pacific, and good morning, Americas. Welcome to the webinar on sustainable business models on circularity in the built environment. My name is Pekka Huovila. I'm coordinator of the Sustainable Buildings and Construction Program of the One Planet Network, and I'm doing this for the Ministry of the Environment Finland. I'm most happy to moderate this interesting session that gained a lot of interest and was actually quite quickly sold out, so will be a full house today. The webinar has been organized by two programs over the One Planet Network, Buildings and Construction and Tourism, supported by the BAM program that is funded by the European Commission. And we have integrated this as part of the series of webinars of the Sustainable Tourism Program. As many of you may know, the One Planet Network is the new brand for the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production. The network is a global framework of action to enhance international cooperation to accelerate the shift towards sustainable consumption and production patterns in both developed and emerging countries. The One Planet Network consists of 6 programs, and out of them, we, Buildings and Construction and Tourism, offer opportunities to aggregate the efforts of members to accelerate sustainable consumption and production in the construction and tourism sector, and to advance the related SDGs, notably SDG 12 on responsible consumption and production, but also other related SDGs. The program also offers possibilities for members to participate in public fora, discussions and debates, and gain international visibility. Moreover, we foster synergies across members for the implementation of future activities and the creation of fundraising coalitions. Lastly, the programs offer possibility for members to exchange knowledge, learn from other partners in the program network, share experiences, lessons learned, best practices and tools. The webinar series very well fit under this 4th pillar of the programs. Before we start, I would like to recall a few tips for a smooth session on GoToWebinar. All attendees are on listen-only mode. Attendees can send questions to the panelists anytime throughout the webinar by posting them in the question box of the control panel. When typing a question, please indicate to which panelist it is addressed. At the end of the webinar, during the questions and answers session, I will read out the questions and then the panelists will share their replies. If you need to contact the organizers for other reasons, like connection problems, please refrain from using the question box and use the chat box instead and address your message to organizers. This session is being recorded. You will receive tomorrow a YouTube link with the recording of the session. In fact, all those who registered will receive the link. Feel free to share the recording with your colleagues and networks. Now, let's quickly still recap the objectives of the webinar. The construction sector is the largest consumer of resources, including raw materials, but it's also an attractive investment option to mitigate climate change. Embracing the lifecycle thinking, technology innovation, and adopting new production and consumption models throughout the supply chain can lead to sustainable business models. The tourism sector is growing exponentially and also responsible for decoupling its growth from environmental degradation. Given the extensive supply chain of the tourism sector and its connection with the built environment, integrating approaches for more sustainable consumption in tourism can result in enhanced competitiveness, environmental benefits, and overall destination image. And building technologies can support achieving that. The objectives can then therefore be summarized as providing testimonials of front-running organizations developing and implementing circular models in the built environment, exploring examples of profitable business cases of circular construction management of buildings within the tourism industry. Without taking more of the time, we will now move on to the first presentation of today's webinar. Mr. Nitesh Maghani is the Group Director of Sustainability at Royal BAM Group, a major European construction company. Nitesh will share with us on circular business models for the built environment, which are at the core of his work, and also provide a good point of intersection between the construction and tourism sectors. Nitesh, you have 10 minutes for your presentation. The floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Pekka. Thanks for the introduction. So I was going to reflect on our experience of developing and sort of progressing circular economy thinking through our organization. And, you know, we've got to the point where we developed probably the first semi-circular economy building in the world back in 2013. So we really started working on this from probably 2010-11 onwards, where it was really in the infancy. We joined the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in 2013, and we're very active members of that. And as Pekka said, there's now a growing realization that this all contributes to SDG 12. So we're sort of working our way through understanding the implications of our actions against SDG 12. So what's on the screen at the moment is one of our sort of our statements or mission statements, which really says that we want to realize the benefits of circular economy business models. And again, as Pekka mentioned, is about exploiting our current business model and doing things differently so that there is economic gain for our business, but also clear to see the value proposition to our clients. So just moving on to the next slide. So we have, as I said, a range of experience. And you know, it ranges from what we've completed mainly in the Netherlands, a bit in the UK as well. So we're a European mainly organization, and we do everything from design, construction to operation as well of buildings, assets, infrastructure projects. And hence we have the advantage of covering that whole life cycle and offering life cycle solutions. So even when we did our own premises refit of our premises a couple of years ago, we looked at how we can refurbish or recycle, reuse our own products so that they can be given that new lease of life. So just again, moving to the next page. Yeah, some of the work that we've done, including with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, has really focused our attention on understanding the business models. So we produced a publication last year together with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and Arup in realizing the business models for circularity in the built environment. So some of the enablers that we've identified are design. You're looking at solutions and things that we can do better, capturing information of our assets, in terms of lifecycle data, ownership, warranty, etc. But also collaboration, and within that is business models. And it's really how do we understand the incentivization that we put upon the value chain to do things differently, do things in a different way, and not take a short-term view on products, components, and materials, but actually take that life cycle, the longer-term thinking, so that we can have more gain in terms of economic advantage, but also one of the outcomes is reducing waste, obviously. And the other ones are producing a value proposition to our clients that their asset values will be actually worth more if they do things in a circular way, and we can improve the operational aspect of their product as well. So just moving on again. So I'll give you a few examples. Obviously, I'm going to stick to the 10 minutes, be very brief, but feel free to ask questions afterwards. So the ABN AMRO Pavilion, so it's Circle in Amsterdam, when it came to BAM as a tender, it was not a circular economy approach, and therefore the architect had designed this wonderful concrete structure. It was almost the opposite of sustainable, but it was very stylized, It would have been a landmark building. And I think what we've done in having these discussions and roundtable discussions with the client, with the architects, the engineers, but also bringing on board the supply chain, we've managed to innovate around different solutions to look at modular prefabrication and really designing for disassembly, but not just stopping at design for disassembly, thinking about reuse of materials through that process. And I think collectively, we managed to come up with a totally different solution, a different way of engaging with not just the internal and external stakeholders, but also the client, ABN AMRO, found that for them going through this process with us of engaging with their own employees. So one of the products in the building is jeans, used jeans from the staff, the employees, my colleagues as well, people that were working on the project, and that became acoustic insulation, which is visible to everyone. So next slide is basically looking at how we focused on life cycle thinking. So for example, in a normal process, when you're designing, you look at the inherent risks of building regulations, air tightness, water tightness, fireproofing, etc., performance. But what we did here was we put together a matrix looking at all of this, but also circularity as a key emphasis. And where the client really valued that input is where we could demonstrate by going for material X instead of Y. So if we're going for timber instead of steel or concrete, for example, as the structure, we were able to increase the residual value of those assets. And that became a really important factor going through the process, whereby we had agreements from those suppliers to say, well, actually, if not to say it will happen, but if this building was decommissioned in 20 or 25 years' time, that actually the residual value of that timber structure would be very high compared to a standard building. So again, just moving to the next slide. This sort of highlights some of the case study in effect. What was the business model? So you can see that on average we've achieved residual values of greater than 50% compared with the initial budget cost, and that's after 25 years. And also what we're very keen on exploiting is understanding what different members of the value chain needed to do within their role against the standard linear model. So what does a designer need to do to become more circular? So we've been through that. Obviously you'll get the slide, so I won't go through everything in detail. So if we just move to the next slide. Another project that we worked on, again finished last year, is the Royal Haskelling's DHV office. And this was interesting because it wasn't a new build, it's a refurbishment project where they, as a tenant, wanted to occupy the space for 10 years. And we, as the developer, the contractor, the designer, had to really think around, okay, how do we create a site that gives the occupant, the tenant, that space that they need for and it really got us thinking about, okay, where do we get the best quality materials that can be reused in the first instance, but also after 10 years, if the building gets demolished or they decide not to renew the lease, how can we ensure that the residual value of those materials will be over a certain percentage, and that would guarantee our income, essentially. So we really took the risk on residual value for this project, where in order to get the investor signed up to give us the cash to develop this project for a paying tenant, we had to seek investment. Now the problem being that from the time that we had a design which was signed off to getting the investment, there was probably 3 or 4 months gap. So we had to search for materials, surplus materials, leftover materials, or reused products. And by the time we got the investment, a lot of those, so we quickly realized that there was a challenge in the industry, and that is that we don't really have a marketplace for reuse of materials. And what would really help that is to initiate a circular building platform, and that is a digital marketplace. So that really worked in our favor, and that sort of then led to a product being developed, which is a circular building platform, which we're developing with IBM. Another project which I just wanted to highlight is, again, an experiment we did in London. It was really to try and engage with our supply chain to understand the consequences of giving us materials that we can then reuse or can be fit for purpose for reuse. This was an experiment, and it really challenged the suppliers to think, well, what do I do with those materials when they return back to the manufacturing plant? So again, that was an interesting proposition. I think lastly, I have another slide which really just showcases a few different projects that we're working on, both infrastructure, master planning, but also looking at how we can really encapsulate the built environment, so that when you link to tourism, we're thinking about perception, consumer perception, and that architecture is perceived not just as a static element, but it's creating not just the space and the environment, but also a growing appreciation of how people perceive circularity. And that's quite important, and we've seen that from how the general public have actually come into our buildings, and they can really they see the value, they see the product as a lot more than just a piece of architecture, but they see it as something that has a lot more value within the sort of infrastructure. And then there's other projects there, but I think I do have one which I'll skip over very quickly. If you just click again, is really just top tips. Sorry, you've gone the wrong way. So if you go to the end again, yes. So really, promotion of lifecycle solutions has really helped us to be able to offer our clients the value proposition that they need to understand that the asset value of their building or infrastructure project will be worth more in a circular fashion than a linear fashion. But also to understand different design approaches. It's been key that getting early subcontractor supplier involvement really produces the value that we're looking for, and it's a collective vision that we've been working together to propose circular solutions together. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nitesh. Impressive, and thanks also for respecting the time so that we have time to the questions. We also have already received a couple of those, and we will take them at the end of the session. And those of you who still want to send questions, write it in the question box, and we take them at the end. And remember to address them to certain speaker. I like very much in the presentation this focus on the value creation, and it was also justifying that these business models can be profitable even in the construction sector, which is seen sometimes a bit conservative. But it's time to introduce the second presenter, Dr. Ge Wang. She is a circular economy business model researcher from Vito, Belgium. Dr. Wang's presentation is about challenges and opportunities of circular models for buildings and construction businesses. The floor is yours for coming 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Pekka, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I have been studying circular business models for the building sector in the Horizon 2020 BOM-B project. I'd like to thank the One Planet webinar for the opportunity to share some of my observations. Next slide, please. Sustainable building, it's a very broad concept. It includes many aspects, and the term circular building usually refers to the material aspect. And building circularity can be further divided into 3 levels. So first of all, we want to keep buildings in use for as long as possible. And now this is sometimes not the case, especially for commercial buildings, which often get demolished way before they reach their end of technical life, because the market needs have changed. As I will explain later, one solution to this problem is to design buildings which can more easily adapt to the change of needs. And the second level is a component. When we refurbish, repurpose, or decommission a building, many components, such as the beams, the doors, the interior walls, may still be functional. It will be very nice to reuse them somewhere instead of throwing them away. And the last level is recycling. When things can no longer be used, they should be recycled at raw material level as scrap metal, aggregates, gypsum, etc. Now, successful pilot projects have been demonstrated at all these 3 levels. But for these pilots to go from one-time experiments to regular practices, circular buildings also need to become good businesses. And today I will discuss 2 business challenges concerning the first 2 levels, so it's building repurpose and also component reuse. I will also talk about some opportunities to overcome such challenges. Next slide, please. Yeah, one of the challenges which is particularly relevant for the building sector is how to create short-term incentives. Buildings have very long life cycles. They also often change ownership several times throughout their life cycle. This means the people who pays to build the building is not often the same people who will handle it when it reaches end of life. We all know that building circularity should start from the design phase. But how can we convince people to invest today in circularity for some residual value in the distant future, which will probably be received by someone else? And how can we convince people to invest today in circularity when there's no taxation benefits yet, like those available for building energy improvements? Next slide. There are actually still opportunities. To facilitate building circularity, reversible connections are very important. So instead of using traditional wet adhesive materials, such as mortar, these reversible connections often use dry mechanical components, like these bricks and interior walls. As a result, the construction can be a lot faster. They can be less weather dependent, and they can be less skill dependent. And especially in countries where labor costs are a lot higher than material costs, these reversible connections can provide short-term economic incentives while also providing longer-term circularity potentials. Next slide. And when we think about sustainability, we often think about costs. We will ask, will this cost me more? But solar panels have disrupted that thinking pattern. We realized that we could actually also make money with sustainability. It can be a good investment instead of just being a cost. And if we apply that kind of thinking to the building sector, we see that for commercial buildings, cost is not the most important factor. Rent is. The market value of a commercial building is determined by its potential to generate revenue through rent. Now, that is an interesting value proposition opportunity for building level circularity. Let's suppose a developer who invests in an office building today with a reversible design. That means in the future, if the population grows and more office space is needed, this building can be turned into a bigger office with more floors. Or if the area goes under redevelopment, this building could transform into a hotel or maybe a shopping mall. In other words, the building can adapt to the needs of tomorrow. Well, this will greatly reduce the commercial risk of the building and increases its revenue potential. The key question is, can this be translated into building market price today? And if yes, then we have created a powerful short-term economic incentive. Next. A second challenge, which I will discuss today, concerns circularity at the component level. The reuse value chain of building component is often informal and underdeveloped, like Nitesh has just pointed out. It is actually a generic challenge which applies to many sectors. There are many barriers to reuse. There are technical barriers. People don't buy used smartphones because the technologies are outdated. There are also cultural barriers, like, well, I don't want other people's junk in my house. There are legislative barriers, but probably a most surprising barrier is cost. After all, except for antiques, shouldn't used stuff be a lot cheaper than new stuff? Otherwise, why would anybody buy them? But as we will see on the next slide, this is unfortunately not always the case today. Let's take structural steel elements as an example. Technically speaking, steel does not degrade. Decades later, steel beams can still keep the same performance as when they were new. But today, most used steel beams become scrap metal instead of being reused. The University of Cambridge did a study on why people are not reusing structural steel components. They found that reused steel is often more expensive than new steel. And how is that possible? If we look at the cost markup carefully, we see that reuse involves many extra cost items, such as deconstruction, testing, and reconditioning. They usually sit longer in the warehouse, and also their transportation is far from streamlined. But luckily, with every challenge, there come also opportunities. There are quite a few ongoing initiatives to set up big databases with building components and materials, like the initiative by Roy Baum and IBM. You may have heard of material passports or product passports. These databases plan to collect information on how a building component is manufactured, where it is located, how it is connected, and what happens during the use phase. And these data can have the potential to reduce costs, such as testing, inventory, and transportation, and make reuse steel maybe one day a more cost-competitive option. Next slide. Let me wrap up. If we want to scale up circular building to a level which it will really make a positive difference environmentally, it needs to become an economically logical choice. It is a business challenge, but the answer is not provided by business alone. We need the creativity of architects, engineers, product designers, and technicians for more cost-effective technical solutions. We need the power of large players, such as Roy Baum, to pull the supply chain and reach economy of scale. We need policy instruments which can effectively stimulate good practices. We also need an eye for business opportunities under today's boundary conditions. We need the technology, policy, and business innovation engines to work together so that one day, when talking about circular buildings, instead of asking why, people will say, why not? Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ge. That was very enriching presentation. And once again, to remind those of you that joined a bit later, you can write your questions in the question box and we take them at the end. And it's very interesting to think about buildings that can serve as material banks. And actually, we don't maybe use the word waste any longer afterwards because we take either virgin materials or something reused or recycled from other purposes, even from other sectors. But in this webinar, our last presentation, we have the opportunity to learn from Center for Appropriate Technologies Partner Sustainable Tourism Program, Dr. Robert Wimmer from Austria, who is an executive director and chairman. He will deliver a presentation of 3R methodology for zero carbon resorts, which is lending some of the concepts explored in the previous presentations with an example from the tourism sector, mainly focusing on the renovation and upgrade of existing resorts. Robert, there's also 10 minutes for you before the questions. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. My name is Robert Wimmer, Center for Appropriate Technology, and we are going to, now we are trying to build the bridge between the circular economy, circular buildings, and the tourism industry. What you see here, well, this is a short introduction of Center for Appropriate Technology. We exist since 1986, and the building here is a circular building in itself. That's one of our offices a bit outside of Vienna, and it's not only built all from renewable materials, but it already has an intrinsic concept of material recycling, and not a single component of that building will go to waste after the end of its lifetime. And most of the materials and the components that were used in that building are actually produced on site or prefabricated, and they're all from renewable and natural materials. And it was built like 15 years ago, built and designed as a demonstration building. And it served as a demonstration for a lot of following buildings, including the one that I'm going to show you from a tropical country in the Philippines. So we are not only based in Austria, where our headquarters is, but we do have international offices. One is right in Manila, where we do the Zero Carbon Resorts project, tackling with Philippines and also Thailand. And we do have another office in Kathmandu, Nepal, where we basically serve the South Asian countries. And the Zero Carbon Resorts project itself is a 4-year initiative, which will actually end this year, and it's supported by the European Union with the Switch Asia program and the Austrian Development Corporation. Next slide. Our project objective is to contribute to sustainable development of the tourism sector at large, with the aim to create a critical mass of SME companies demonstrating the value of green tourism by increasing resource efficiency and using renewable resources, at the same time increasing profit and creating value for the communities and serve as a driver. The methodology looks a bit complex, and yes, it is. We've started off with a very small group of frontier companies, as you can see here, maybe like 20 companies. We've combined that with a training system. We trained about 200 local engineers, architects, in order to help spreading the news and spreading the concept via the help of tailorized tools from handbooks, brochures, website materials that all serve as a outreach material. And the 3R methodology that has been raised in the title is really meant to be a triple bottom line approach. The reduce is harvesting the low-hanging fruits with very limited investment costs, and I'll show you a few examples right now. Next. So for instance, we talk about behavior change. That's nothing where you need to take money to your hand. Shifting electrical loads to low cost usage periods will already generate savings, and those savings can be used later on, just like with the next few examples. Again, behavior change. Useless consumption and standby is rampant and very abundant. Lights are on during the day. Standby is on in all rooms. This is all energy cost that has no benefit, but it comes with a price tag. Another example is on our next slide. Daylight can be used in so many cases, and it's basically free of cost. We have developed a number of, well, nice looking but very cheap solutions, and our participating companies have been very creative in supporting that initiative. So you can definitely see a number of nice examples here, which are another issue is the air conditioning. Air conditioning is very often just very inefficient, and even without changing the equipment, you can drastically reduce the energy consumption by sealing the gaps, by closing the doors, by not cooling the ambient rooms, and that all boils down to a significant number of savings, which, after all, at the end of the day, is money not spent for operational costs, just like changing the color of the roof. If you look at the temperatures, by just changing from the very popular red or green colors to a white roof, you can change the roof temperature, and that is the biggest challenge in the tropical situation, by about 30 degrees, and that makes a big difference regarding the conditioning needs. And it definitely shows in the electricity bill. So now all those savings that were generated in this reduced phase, we ask the companies to reinvest. So don't put it aside, don't regard it a profit, but reinvest that by replacing, by switching to renewable energy, by switching to more energy efficient appliances. And we help them also choose the most efficient ones. And by doing so, they can actually generate more savings, which eventually will lead us to our ultimate goal. So for instance, photovoltaic prices came down, so they became a lot more affordable. And in an island situation where you're not competing with a general electricity grid, but with a diesel generator in the backyard, that is even, the break even is even closer, and the suppliers are picking up because it was rather undeveloped area to supply renewable energy devices such as PV, but nowadays it's definitely picking up, and they are supplied in good quality as well. So PV panels, solar tubes, again, daylighting techniques on a more commercial level, that is a dual benefit. Not only you get a high quality indoor light for offices and kitchens, but you also reduce the heat gain from the lighting fixtures, and in return less energy for air conditioning. Next slide, please. Okay, air conditioning and other energy appliances, we definitely help them to switch to inverters, to high energy efficient appliances, from fridges to TVs to air conditioners, washing machines, and all other appliances that are commonly used in hotels and resorts. Next slide, please. Another very hot topic in the literal sense is heat recovery from air conditioning, because that is a far underdeveloped concept. Using the waste heat from the air conditioning to produce hot water, that is a big deal of energy savings and cost savings as well. But the suppliers are still a bit reluctant to produce or supply that in small scale. Same as with commercial solar hot water heaters, we had a little problem in availing good quality products, and some are, well, the situation is getting better, but we were also looking at the other end of the scale, because with the abundance of solar radiation, such as in tropical Philippines, you can easily do a do-it-yourself solar water heater, and that was targeting the rather poor communities or small beach cottages with very limited investment possibilities. And we have designed and built prototypes with published open source do-it-yourself appropriate technology measures, which are free of charge, and they are actually being used by the resorts, and as you can see here in some of our member hotels, they're further developed, they do little changes, and that is sort of a growing community of educational value as well, because once you do engage in do-it-yourself technologies, you truly understand the nature and the concepts behind, and you do not mistake it with PV or with other appliances that are probably a bit more expensive, but you really understand what the whole concept is all about, and you can teach your neighbors, and that's what's actually also happening. What you see here is the same story for biogas generation in a tropical country. This is again not rocket science. We can make do-it-yourself biogas from kitchen waste, which again goes back as a cooking fuel in the same restaurant. This is an example from Thailand. So, and the redesign is actually bridging those two topics that we're talking about today, the tourism and the construction. We were aiming to design and build a showcase building that can integrate all the technical features and serve as a construction model for the future, which is island fit. And with island fit, I mean, change slide, please. I would need, yeah, okay. So we call it the Zero Carbon Resort Learning Center, and we are a little bit proud that we actually won the Global Human Settlement Award in 2015 with that construction in UN headquarters in New York. It's totally made from bamboo and local materials. It is using indigenous skills and knowledge, and it has incorporated all those technical innovations that were built along the project lifetime. So you can see a couple of initiatives or innovations on. So passive cooling is of course the key. We do not use any air conditioning system. We do have an extensive analysis of the indoor climate and the comfort parameters, and it's pretty well measured. So we do achieve comfortable indoor climate with natural building materials, with renewable energy, with efficient technologies. Even the water is purely rainwater. We do not have any wastewater. Everything is treated on site, and in the sense of circular economy, is used for generating food, growing tomatoes, so even the nutrients are recycled. And the building monitoring system, which is up and running until today, is actually proving the data and comparing it with the weather situation that we have on site. Next slide, please. So what you see here is a rammed earth wall on the upper left corner, which serves as a heat sink to improve the indoor climate in terms of stabilizing the temperature. We have anahau leaves for the roof. We have a triple layer roof, which can definitely reject or reflect the heat. We even have a solar cooker, and the only active components are low wattage ceiling fans to improve the air movement in the building with as low as 5 to 15 watt. The blue container on the bottom shows the rainwater harvesting. Okay, next slide. So in a nutshell, we did a comparison with a standard cottage of the same size, and what you see here circled in red is that we actually consume only about 4% of electricity compared to a conventional building of the same size in the tourism industry. And that comes with a 24/7 availability, which is not guaranteed in that area because Palawan in the Philippines, where the building is situated, is experiencing frequent brownouts, blackouts almost every day. So you cannot have a 24-hour electricity guarantee. With the standalone PV system, it is very well possible. And since the panels are so small, it is again even affordable. And that is quite well acknowledged by all our member hotels. At the moment, we do have 860 plus hotels, resorts, and other tourism establishments registered in the Philippines. We have another 300 in Thailand, and it's a growing community. Not all of them are implementing everything to the last possible measure, but they are learning from each other. And since the threshold, the step-in threshold is very low, they are easy, the buy-in is easy, and they are led gradually to implement more sophisticated measures, with the final goal being the zero carbon resort. Okay, next slide. Next slide. So here you see an overview of the savings just for 265 companies that we've analyzed in every single detail, because it's very comprehensive to collect all those data. In total, we have maybe 170 different measures, but those 265 is a crosscut, a representative crosscut, and only those are actually offsetting a 12 megawatt power plant. They're offsetting the carbon emissions of 10,000 cars a year, and they are saving energy or electricity equivalent to the consumption of 80,000 homes, basically, and water 60,000 homes. Next. Next slide. So in terms of monetary value, because I often get this feedback, well, going green is not affordable, it must be costly. It is exactly the other way around. And those 265 companies save an equivalent of 7.2 million euro every year. So now if you imagine an upscale, and that's what we are actually aiming at, an upscale to the entire industry, the economic savings as well as the carbon emission reductions will be enormous. Next slide. In order to standardize the whole thing, we have closely collaborated with the Department of Tourism in the Philippines, and we have created a certification which is called the ANAHAO. And the logo indicates the ANAHAO is the local term for round leaf palm, which is used also in our demonstration building. It's the unofficial national leaf. It's a very unique plant that had undergone very creative uses, from bags to roofs to all sort of other handicrafts. And the ANAHAO certification has been launched 2 months ago and is currently under rollout. So with that, we are expecting a lot of more followers and a little bit more standardized approach. It has been developed bottom up. That makes it different from other green labels, if you want, by really looking at which measures actually work in the country, which are accepted, and how can we bring them all together in order to create a standard that goes from one step to the other. We have five levels of this certification, which you can see on the next slide. And all of them are roughly associated with the potential savings in economic terms. We are a bit strict, so it's not easy to get the first level. But if you do follow the suggestions, and we do have the consultants on the ground that can help the establishments, they can actually expect economic savings from operational expenses of something between 50 and 60%. Next slide, please. And another unique feature is we do not just rely on a checklist, but very similar to the construction in Europe, the construction sector in Europe, we compute indicators. In this case, we do not compute indicators per square meter, but per guest night. And the two indicators that we're starting off, because they're most important, are the kilowatt hour per guest night, electricity consumption or energy consumption, and the cubic meter per guest night, water consumption. So if you don't meet those criteria, you cannot avail for the certification, even though you have a number of other nice features to offer. So with that very short summary, I'm looking forward to getting a few questions to have a few more minutes to explain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wimmer. I think it was also an excellent example of synergies between the One Planet Network programs, how building technologies can be used in the benefit of zero carbon resort. And it was also very good to show practical examples how you can save 96% of the emissions by looking at these aspects, and also at the same time providing comfortable indoor climate. There were some questions, general questions, whether the presentations will be available and whether the webinar will be recorded. That is done, and you will get information about that tomorrow. So you can see the webinar also on YouTube. We have a couple of minutes time still for discussion, and Dr. Wang was addressed a question on how to quantify the issues she was presenting, and I think you can already explain directly based on your research how that can be justified.
Right. So we're actually currently doing a really quantitative calculation based on a real life case. So it's a real life office building in Belgium. So we're looking at, if it's built in a conventional way or if it's built in a reversible way, what are the cost consequences and what are the possible revenue consequences. And so we're really trying to give a quantitative example of whether reversible buildings can have a positive business case. So if you're interested, you're welcome to contact me, and I can provide more details. But once the exercise is done, it will also be disseminated.
Yes, all the panelists will be available also after this webinar to answer the question. But if I pick up some questions that have been posted, and you can still write more there, start from a simple one that was addressed to Nitesh about the certainty of the used or recycled materials performance. Are there some issues concerning the assurance as an example?
So the certainty of performance, thanks, Becca. I think it's very early to sort of tell how these products, components, and materials stand the test of time. I mean, certainly what we're doing is we're trying to validate the performance, and in some cases put in place performance contracts. So keeping the onus of responsibility directly with the supplier certainly helps to start to validate not just the short-term current model, which is point of sale, product goes off from manufacturing plant to supplier to owner, building owner, and there's a lack of connection between the manufacturer and the end user. Now, what we're trying to do is to bring that accountability back to the manufacturer, so that they either give a performance guarantee or they take back the product after end of life or after the first life. And that certainly is making manufacturers and product suppliers think harder about what they do with their products to make them more durable, to make them last longer. And ultimately, if they are going to be the ultimate owner of these products, what they're going to do with the products when it comes back to them. And therefore, all of this is helping the industry, or it will help the industry, to think about future uses, to think about reducing waste, using less energy and remanufacturing, etc. So I think it's still early days, but we're starting to tackle these challenges with different business models and incentivization, I suppose.
Thank you. I have unmuted all the speakers, so if the other panelists want to complement something, that's also possible. But let's continue on this topic. And there was a question also to Realbam that do you see that circularity, but through this circularity, you can create your own material platform. So from project to project, you can use your own, like demolished and reused components. How is that landing on your business model?
It's not really a business model as such. It's more a case of, certain projects having knowledge of previous projects where they've done something differently, or there's been a surplus of materials, and I suppose this all leads to the question of how do we get more, realize the potential both within our own company, our own projects, but actually more importantly, how can the industry benefit from reuse of materials generally? So I wouldn't say we're the experts. We have used surplus materials from old projects on our current circular projects, but I don't think it's mainstream just yet.
And maybe then a question that may be interesting for everyone to say some comments on. Are there some financial arguments on this when you are proposing this circularity approach there? Are the banks more favorable towards that, or do you find incentives from the financial side? Start from Claire as an example.
Yeah, right. I quickly answer that. So towards banks, indeed, residual value can be a factor, especially if residual value can be used to influence the mortgage conditions. And we have seen that in one front-runner case, for example, the City Hall of Venlo in the Netherlands, where actually the bank agreed to assume a certain percentage residual value and reduced the mortgage payment based on that. And I think another interesting factor to be discussed with the bank is they, as I explained in my presentation, so can building reversibility, building transformability be translated into building market price of today. As bank is a large investor in buildings, especially commercial buildings, this could be a very interesting discussion.
And the same question to Robert, how were you able to convince your client in this case for the circularity? Were there some financial incentives also coming from the banking side?
We do have financial cooperations with the major banks, but that was not the starting point at all. The starting point was really the showcasing of effective measures without investment, and that was communicated widely, and that created a very significant followers group. And only later, when it came to expansion of buildings, that was the time when we had some green financing cooperation with banks. But I don't see that the major drive. And I think there was also a question about Latin America. Yes, it is definitely applicable, and we do receive requests from Latin America. Interest is there. What has to be worked out is the how, because in Asia we have been operating on European Union grants, or at least co-funding, and that is not applicable to other countries. But however, it is a business model that can probably survive without funds as well if it is tailored properly, and we're happy to support whoever is taking the initiative. I think there was one more question, how it is ensured that realistic measures. Well, we do have a live database. I think we have the largest database of existing showcases. We have been doing that for the last 10 years. The project that I've presented was only lasting for 4 years, but that was the second in a row. And we have actually started doing that from 2009. So we pretty well know what works on the ground and how the companies are doing, and they are collecting data for their own businesses. And we have an online database where we can follow the improvement in real terms. So that is our security measure. Also the benchmark. What is the usual consumption and what is a outstanding efficiency. So that's where we base the indicators.
When thinking about this global need for, as an example, affordable, sustainable housing, where our SPC program is very much focusing on, how do you see these tourist resorts seem to be quite close to that? I mean, how can that be adapted, like in the African conditions? And the same question then to Nitesh after you, Robert, on based on the experiences on the office and industrial development, could that serve also in affordable, sustainable housing?
Okay, actually, I just came back from the NIDO mission in Africa, and yes, I think it is with a certain demand for adaptation, because it cannot be replicated or one-to-one, but it has a potential for replication in Africa and in other Asian developing countries at affordable cost. It always depends a little bit on what skills and what knowledge is available in the country, and also what are the climate conditions to be met. But I think it has a unique possibility of replication. Even in the disaster reconstruction, we have been involved for Nepal after the earthquake, and there also I see a big potential of replication, because it can be made quite affordable.
Thank you. And then Nitesh, what's your view on affordable housing based on your experience?
It's a difficult one. I think it's a broader answer in that, generally speaking, we can see that, let's say, third world countries often are more resourceful than Western society, and therefore there's a lot we can learn from not just looking at different continents and the way that, let's say, India are fairly well self-sufficient as a country, as a nation, and they value their products and materials and components a lot more than we do in the Western world. But also looking outside of our own industry, you're looking at where other organizations have actually made gains to sort of have a closed loop system, exploit different business models. And I think there's a lot to be gained from, looking outside of construction industry, let's say. One of the issues that Kay mentioned earlier, quite rightly, is that in housing, one of the issues that we have is that with short-term ownership, maybe 5 to 10 years, there's probably lack of incentivization for the consumer to really take on board circular thinking in terms of their housing construction, because they're not incentivized to think longer term. So again, it depends on the development or ownership model that we have. And generally what we see in construction is end users, long-term developers, long-term asset owners tend to take more notice, because they'll see that value proposition come back to them in sort of 20, 50, 100 years time. So that's where I think we need to focus.
Thank you. I think we have still a lot of things to discuss, but we are a bit running over time, and therefore I'm addressing the last question to Kay concerning these buildings as material banks. So what kind of data, what sort of information do you provide from the database, and which are the challenges there, and how do the manufacturers find their role in there? Is it let's say a burden for them, or do they gain out of that?
Yeah, that is a really it's a really valid question, because indeed this database will require the value chain, especially manufacturers, to enter data. And so the manufacturers may feel reluctant out of confidentiality concerns. For example, okay, I might have IP, I might have trade secrets, and I don't want to reveal those to the others. And to address that concern, there are companies working on kind of communication protocols, so blockchain-based communication protocols, exactly on this kind of questions. So how can you communicate data in a more confidential way. And also we need to, I think we can think very carefully which data is really needed to facilitate circularity. We probably don't need everything, right? And another concern from manufacturer could be more economically related. So why should I do this? What's in for me? And so if we take the example I showed, if the data could help to reduce cost in the value chain, we could also think how that saving can be redistributed across the value chain. So it's a very quick answer.
Yeah. Yes, I think we need another webinar as a follow-up to on this. But the thing that I think concerns everyone, including contractors, designers, and different suppliers, the whole value chain has to be playing the same game. And like the benefits should also be shared, so that each actor is not only sub-optimizing their, let's say, one project profit, but sees the business model. And therefore, this is very much in the core. But I think I'm afraid we have to close the webinar this time. Thank you very much. Thanks for the panelists. Thanks for the wonderful audience. Unfortunately, everyone couldn't join because we were fully booked. But there will be a link to see the recording to everyone that registered in. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar of the One Planet Network. So keep on tuned, and thank you very much.